reading tales of ancient might, pages worn by time and hands, songs of distant ancient lands. Heroes brave with swords of sheen, kings and queens in worlds unseen, legends born from ink and scroll, in the words I find my soul. Pages of old come alive, history's breath in each sigh. Classics whisper wisdom grand, in these books my heart expands.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I have several videos planned to be recorded tonight, but we'll see how many I get in before I have to stop. I might have to pick up and start again tomorrow night. But I wanted to get, reaching down for my water. I want to get some videos in before Christmas happens. Even if they're not released until after. I can't remember if I mixed my water. I keep in here something called Normalite. It's got electrolytes in it, usually kind of things that you would suggest for athletes, but the person who created Normalite, I believe, if I remember correctly from the podcast episode I listened to, they were saying that I want to say they have pharmaceutical background, and they were thinking of people who have dysautonomia, specifically POTS. And actually, Dysautonomia International has a deal with Normalite, where Normalite will have a portion of its proceeds go toward Dysautonomia International.
I just realized I didn't explain that very well. When you have the specific form of dysautonomia called POTS, you have trouble moving your blood along, and you need more fluids to kind of keep your heart rate at a normal level. Now, because you need to drink more fluids, you run the risk of having too few electrolytes just because it's being flushed out of your system. Not to mention, it's just more water to fewer electrolytes, so in general. And the way that is combated with Normalite is you're adding these extra electrolytes when you're drinking. The salt keeps the water in the bloodstream so that it keeps your blood pressure up, so that it keeps your heart rate down. That sounds counterintuitive, but it does make sense, because when you're specifically for a dysautonomia patient, although you also will see this in some cases, I saw this a couple times in ICU with other patients, but you will see when the blood pressure drops, the body will try to make up for that by the heart beating faster in order to continue getting oxygen to the rest of the body. But if you have a good level of fluid within the cardiovascular system, that will make it so that way your heart rate doesn't have to be going so fast, and it can slow down to more normal level. This is why for certain patients with POTS, if you give them a beta blocker, which the way it works is it lowers the heart rate but simultaneously lowers the blood pressure. So if I noticed when I had a beta blocker, I would actually have my heart rate spike even more, because it would drop my blood pressure down to a systolic of being in the 70s, which would make me feel even more like I would faint. And then my heart rate would continue to climb into 140s, 150s, 160s, while just sitting there. And when I'm saying systolic 170s, that's the top number. I mean, when I'm saying your systolic of 70s, that is your top number of your blood pressure. Normally, you want to see that in like the 100 to 120 range for that top number of your blood pressure. But yeah, just wanted to explain why Dysautonomia International would be interested in something like Normalite.
If you buy their pure one, which is like, tastes like nothing but basically salt, which is gross if you do tap water, because then it tastes like you're drinking like chlorine or something. Even with the flavored ones, I have to do like water from the fridge versus tap water, because I don't feel like drinking a pool water. But yeah, that's what's in here. But if I don't mix it up, I get a very strong salt flavor. Anyway, my plan is to do, whether it's tonight or tomorrow night, a book haul video, but I want to touch on my 2025 plans for the next 2 videos. So this one and the one after. So what I'm going to start with are my current reads, and then I'll do a TBR in a different video. This one should be fairly quick because I have been talking about these books on and off-ish, but just it's nice to have a little bit of an overview of what I am currently reading headed into 2025. Now, I've mentioned before that, and I forgot to bring it with me, that I have been reading To Kill a Mockingbird with a group of people on YouTube. We meet by Zoom once a week. Now we're missing the next 2 weeks for Christmas and New Year's because we would otherwise be doing it on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. We are the Tuesday study group. We get onto Zoom, we talk. We usually end up, it's supposed to be an hour. I think we usually end up taking about an hour and a half, where we read the book together and then we discuss as we go. And it's been a really great format. And as I've mentioned in the past, when I discussed this format of reading with my mom, she said, oh, I really like that. So we decided to do it for ourselves. And we decided to start headed into Advent. So we've been doing this for a couple of weeks now, where we will have one day where we read something that's more religious focused and one day where we choose like a fictional book. And we ended up going for our religious book, and we'll be going into, the 12 days and Christmas and all that. We'll probably almost be going into Lent with this. This is Scott Hahn's Joy to the World, How Christ's Coming Changed Everything and Still Does. I actually went to Franciscan University, which is the school that Scott Hahn teaches at. There was a joke when I had my... when you come in, and they have all the freshmen, like, not inaugural, that's not at all what I want to say. I can't think of the word. Anyway, where you're like, hey, here's the school, let's do some skits for you. Like, let's just introduce you to, not orientation, but almost along that realm. They had a skit where people were like, yeah, we're going to go sightseeing. There's Scott Hahn's house, because he, of course, lives in Steubenville because he teaches there. So I have several of his books, some of which I used as materials for classes within, like the classes I took that were not nursing, for my nursing classes, some of my religious classes that I had at Franciscan. But this was not one of them. This one I picked up on my own. But I do have a small collection of his books because of that. This will be, I think, the first one my mom has, maybe the second one my mom has read. So she and I are reading it together. It's not a hard read. Now, because we are reading aloud, it might take a little bit longer than anticipated, especially if one or both of us is tired. We end up having to split this chapter 3 a little bit more up than we wanted to, but we will pick up hopefully sometime next week. Then the other one that we're reading, I showed you guys in one of my earlier videos, one of my past videos fairly recently, the Agatha Christie collection that was put out by, who put out these? Bantam Books. And this one is A Holiday for Murder, which is the title I first came upon it as was Hercule Poirot's Christmas. And I first got that book as a paperback That was my very first Agatha Christie book I read when I was like 10. And so this book has always had a special place in my heart. This particular collection, like I mentioned with the Holiday for Murder title, it actually has 3 titles. And I think I mentioned that when I went through my Checkerpea checklist in my pre-Christie's Missing Readathon video. It's got, let's see, what are the names? This one usually is pretty nice at giving me the different names. Okay, Holiday for Murder, originally published under the title Murder for Christmas. And I guess the U.S. title must have been Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Honestly, the other 2 titles are better titles, so it's kind of fun to have this one. This is a book that both my mom and I really enjoy, so it's fun visiting it again together. There is an interesting thing where I believe it's the more recent Murder on the Orient Express movie, which I don't see any of the Poirot productions. If I see any of them, it's Suchet's, because Suchet has made a very special effort. He's done all the works now of Poirot, which was his goal, but he very much made himself an advocate for that character. He felt like he was representing that character for Agatha Christie, and he was approved by Christie's daughter, and she wanted to make sure that Suchet would represent Poirot properly and not treat him as a joke, which Suchet never has, and he actually would keep a notebook of different Poirot characteristics, so that way he would properly represent the character. Honestly, anything I dislike in the show is not Suchet's fault. It's the fault of either whoever is running that particular episode or whatever, because they've had points where they've changed dramatically plot lines, where they've changed endings, where it made no sense. It wasn't like it made it a better story or more appropriate for the medium. It was just them messing with it for no reason, like changing a murderer or something like that. But more apropos for this particular title is the more recent Murder on the Orient Express. I believe it's Kenneth Branagh who plays Poirot in that. They took a character from this book and transplanted her into Murder on the Orient Express. Why, I don't know, because she doesn't belong there. It doesn't make sense for that character to be there. It's just that they were like, oh, we want you here because, honestly, I feel like it was a representation issue. They were like, oh, we don't have this Spanish character here. We don't have this represented in the movie. So let's pull her from her rightful story and throw her over here. I think they replaced, like, she was either Dutch or Swiss. They replaced her with Pilar, which it's annoying. Pilar only really works well in the context of her story. So to just like take her from her story and throw her somewhere else is just bad writing, bad representation of Christie's work, and honestly disrespectful of the work. So I will not be seeing Kenneth Branagh's Murder on the Orient Express. Again, also I hate the way they made his mustache look. It looks stupid. But yes, this is one of my favorite books of Christie's because it has it's got sentimental value as well as it just being, I like the characters in it. And Pilar is a good character. She just deserves to be a part of her own story and not stolen from her story and placed somewhere else where she doesn't belong. Now, other ones that I'm currently reading, I've got, okay, anyone else who's in the David McCullough read-along, are you behind on The Great Bridge? I am laughably, hilariously, sadly behind on The Great Bridge. I need to pick up the pace. I am a little over 50% through. I might be at 60%. So I really need to just get moving. I know I put myself behind with the Christie's Missing Readathon. My fault. And then I've been distracted for the past, like toward the last quarter, a little bit more than a quarter of the year, I've just been really distracted. So, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. This wasn't a book I probably would have chosen on my own to read. There are things in it that I'm like, oh, okay, that is very interesting. The information about the Bens. They touched very briefly on Dr. Walter Reed, who we actually went for my sister's back stuff. I believe it was for back stuff, where we went to Walter Reed Hospital. And Walter Reed is it's a military hospital. I can't remember if it's Navy or what it is. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that one was the one that was a military hospital and not Bethesda. Anyway, it's been too long. It's been eons ago. But it was kind of cool to see Walter Reed touched on, although he dealt with things with the Bens early in his career. I guess his claim to fame was more with yellow fever. So outside the purview of this book. But them talking about the Bens and explaining that is a lot more intelligible to me than when they went through and started talking about the structure of the bridge. And I have to focus a lot more on that because it's engineering and just a little bit, it's just not my area of interest necessarily. So that I tend to slog a little bit when they hit the engineering stuff. But when you start focusing on George Washington Roebling himself or the personalities surrounding it, then it's very interesting to me.
Editing Talia here. Once again, I just have to throw in a quick correction. And I know I called him here George Washington Roebling. Not his name. It's just Washington Roebling. And since recording this video here, I have read farther into the book. I'm going on 80% now. It's really has heated up for me. I'm actually starting to get angry on Roebling's behalf with certain things that are coming up. This will happen to me when reading about historical figures in the past. Once I get really invested in them, then I will really end up feeling a way about them. I will empathize strongly, or I'll get upset with them, like whatever the case may be. And when they're talking about the deal, the contract for the wire, and about the wire fraud that occurs later on related to the other company chosen instead of Roebling's, and a couple of other things that occur that really Roebling didn't deserve the flack he ended up getting, and he deserved far more credit than he was getting at the time. I am now very invested. I'm headed into a chapter about Emily Roebling, his wife, so I only see this continuing to be a quicker read. And honestly, I have every expectation now of being able to finish this book before the beginning of 2025, which is not something that I would have said when I had initially recorded the video that you are currently seeing.
But yeah, the writing style is good. It's just that it's a harder topic in my opinion. So I don't know if anyone else is behind on this. Next one that I've been reading, and this one will go into next year because I don't feel like this is quite as Historathon related, especially since I've gotten to the point where we're just going through words. But that sounds boring, but it's not. So this is the Ring of Words, Tolkien in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I've gone through the part where it talks about his part in the Oxford English Dictionary. And now we're just going through, it's a section called Word Studies. And so it'll have various different words that Tolkien would have used and talk about, okay, this is where it came from based on the OAD. This is other places where you would have seen it used. Actually quite interesting stuff. And yeah, I've been really enjoying this. I don't want to go too much in detail because I do a solitary book review for each book that I finish, so I don't like to go into too much detail while I'm currently reading the book. But I am still reading this, and this will be staying for a little while at least into next year. Then, hang on guys, sorry. It's cold. Anyway, this one I've been reading over a period of seasons. So I started this in the spring because that's when they start the book. They start it with foaling, I want to say. Yeah, I want to say this started with foaling. But I have the one last section, which is winter. So I can do this in 2026, January, February, if I want to. And I might just end up doing that just because I do have so many books that are more ones I want to finish in 2025, if at all possible. The Great Bridge. But yeah, this one has been an enjoyable read. I have been enjoying it, reading it based off of what season that we are in and seeing where this particular yarn farm would be at in its processes based off of that. And there's some stuff with yarn dyeing in here that my mom, who is a yarn dyer, might be interested in. Then some of the other things, I started this for Christie's Missing, and I'm still reading it. It was a pipe dream that I would finish it during that time period. It's a thick book, but I've been wanting to read this for so long. This is that biography I was talking about where Christie's daughter, approved it. And so this author had sources available to her that previous biographers of Christie didn't have open to them because they were unapproved biographies. And sometimes people would make things up, and people who were close to Christie, who knew how private of a person she was, wouldn't open up. But once this author came along and she was able to say, yes, Christie's daughter has approved me to work on this, all of a sudden people were like, oh yeah, let me tell you about her. Let me tell you about Agatha. So this has been a very interesting read. And I do love my uneven pages here, even though it does make tabbing a little bit of a challenge. And I do try, because I feel like I'm concerned about bringing up the ink if I have my tabs right on the words, so I try to cut my tabs a little bit more to make sure they don't actually hit the words. But I was vindicated by Christie herself mentioning that, and I mentioned this, I think, in my last Christie video, or not my last one, my second to last one, I think, at the time of posting this, where I mentioned that The Big Four and The Blue Train were two books that she didn't like, and this was because she was forced to write them under a time of great stress, which was around the time right after she came back from being missing. But yeah, all the more recent fun stuff that I mentioned for Christie that didn't come from the golden age of murder, which I talk about in a fairly recent video, those facts come from here. Or from Lucy Worsley's biography. Now, I had my issues, and I think I mentioned this for last Christie's Missing Readathon. I had my issues with Lucy Worsley's biography, mostly because I felt like she wasn't as professional as she could have been. I don't want to know that the author of the book thinks that Christie's first husband was hot, and that's literally, she almost said it exactly like that. And I'm like, okay, that just, no, it's just, it doesn't feel very professional. I know that there are different levels of how much like a conversation you want your book to be. I want to kind of forget that the narrator's there when I'm reading nonfiction, unless there's some reason that I need to be aware of them. And it just felt like author intrusion when I was dealing with Lucy Worsley. And there were a couple other things, I believe I mentioned in another video, where she would mention like Christie being a trailblazer for female authors, but she would forget that she mentioned people like Austen, and I think she mentioned Bronte, Dorothy L. Sayers. She was acting like Christie was like this, wow, where did she come from? It's like, you mentioned these other female authors. So there were some things that the Lucy Worsley book that I had issues with, but some of the facts that when I talk about Christie, I pull from that Lucy Worsley book as well. Another book I'm reading, I wasn't planning on reading. I wasn't planning on reading Persuasion this year. I was on Bookstagram and I saw that they were finishing up I guess they were doing a year-long with reading different Austen works, and I happened to come in on Persuasion, which is, I believe it is actually the shortest of her books, not including the novella Lady Susan. So I jumped on it. It's the first of my annotated books of Jane Austen that I'm reading. The binding's a little bit messed up with this. I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. But, and it does show the first time I fell asleep on the book, I cracked the binding a little bit more. But this is my annotated version. This is the one I'm going to write in. It's not a big deal. I have a nice copy that I'll be able to just, take care of. I didn't intend to have two different copies of Austen's works, but I couldn't resist this annotated version. And I'll review this more in detail when I finish it. I mentioned previously that I'm reading How to Read a Book. This one will be going into next year and however long it takes me to read this. But I actually had the opportunity to bring it up in my book group for To Kill a Mockingbird, because we were discussing reading comprehension and where people don't necessarily sit there and think fully about the books. They can read the words, but the deeper concepts or the critical thinking can be at times lacking. And the person leading the book group is a former English teacher, and she was talking about, I was surprised to learn that the reading level is like, I can't remember what she said, but I think we've said like a 5th grade, 6th grade level. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what they mentioned in this book, How to Read a Book. This book's been out since the 1950s. Various, editions of it. It came out initially in 1950. So I thought that was funny, and I was able to bring this book out, and it just happened to be right there next to me where I keep all the books I'm currently reading. And then the other one that I've been reading is, and that's not including like my Advent meditations and stuff that I forgot to bring with me, but I was reading this on Kindle, and then I decided that I would get more out of it if I read it physically, and I'm glad I did because I've been writing notes in it and tabbing things. And that is Thomas Sowell's Controversial Essays. And I remember enjoying it when I was trying to read it on Kindle, but I kind of just dropped off because it was a mixture of out of sight, out of mind, and also I feel like something where you want to really kind of chew on what you're reading, it's kind of better in a physical form. And yeah, I'm not terribly far in because then Christie's Missing happened, but I was trying to read one of his essays a day. And the essays aren't terribly long. They usually are no more than like 2, maybe 3 pages back and front. And the text is not a small type. But I mean, they start off right off the bat with a topic that I was interested in. Actually, what got me into reading Soul is my dad and I were having a discussion about drug prices and why they tend to be higher in the United States versus in other countries. And that has everything to do with the amount of research we put in this country. And so we end up paying more because it costs to research, go back to the drawing board when you need to. Your price of your pill is paying for all those years of research. And that's not just like the actual studies. You're having to pay, possibly paying people who are, involved in the studies. not just the researchers, but the people who are like however many number of people that you're having take part in the study. You know, if you're doing a small study, but you want to do more than one study, you want to do trials, and then, you know, you want to make sure it's safe to come out. So a lot of times you're not just paying for your pill, like what it makes to make the pill, that might be relatively cheap. It's everything that went into getting to that point. So that topic was what got me to get this book, and that is the first essay, which is very interesting, very still holds up today. This is an older book. I want to say that this is it's 2002. Oh, and I just noticed I have a little ex libris tag in here from whoever owned this book before. But I loved the way they start off this first essay, because it starts off with something that, if you are a crafter, this is or an artist or whatever, this is something that's come up at some point for you, most likely. And the way he starts it off is, a tourist in New York's Greenwich Village had his portrait sketched by a sidewalk artist who charged him $100. That's expensive, the tourist said, but it's a great sketch, so I'll pay it. But really, it took you only 5 minutes. 20 years and 5 minutes, the artist replied. And I can't tell you the number of times I would have someone I worked with come to me and be like, oh, can you just like crochet me this or knit me this? You're going to be doing it anyway. And if you wanted to, like, if they were willing to pay for it, they'd want to pay you like $10, $15 maybe if you were lucky. And it'd be like, that's not even going to pay for that barely pay for my materials, most likely not pay for my materials, let alone pay for my time, my experience. So that introduction for anyone who has had anyone be like, can't you draw, knit, crochet, make XYZ for me? It puts into easy perspective the drug price issue. And if you want to read more about why it's more expensive here versus there, and any other number of controversial essays that he goes through, Thomas Sowell's Controversial Essays. He has a very easy to read style. So there's a little bit of humor in there. So I really enjoy his work. And this is I say that this being my first book of his that I've read, but I have others of his books, and I do intend to read his other books. He has a 3-book series on that ends up hitting like world history at some point. I believe it actually probably has an economic bent to it because he is an economist. But yeah, interesting essays in here, still very much appropriate, even, over 20 years later. So that's it for just checking the time, because I'm probably going to have time for one more video, and the videos I wanted to do for haul are going to have to be probably recorded tomorrow night or some point after that. But I do plan on recording them before Christmas. So thank you very much for joining me for this video. Like I said, these are my current reads, some of which are definitely going to be headed into next year. Others I would kind of like to finish before next year. But thank you very much for joining me. Hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you for the next video. God bless. Bye.
Castles tall and battles fierce, knights in armor, hearts sincere, riddles wrapped in lore and rhyme, travel through the hands of time. Sages speak from yellowed leaves, wisdom hidden neath the eaves, every tale a portal wide to a time where legend